Good evening and welcome. I'm Mamta Rawat from the Corporate Communications team of CareEdge. I welcome you to our discussion today on thermal power, turning up the heat. We sincerely appreciate your time in joining us for this webinar. We would like to welcome our esteemed guest speakers for today. Mr. Abhijit Basu, Cluster CFO-Generation at Tata Power. Mr. Dilip Jha, CFO at Adani Power Limited. Mr. Ajay Bagri, CFO at SEIL Energy India Limited. Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Jha, Director of Projects at Power Finance Corporation. This session will be moderated by Mr. Sabyasachi Majumdar, Senior Director at CareEdge Ratings. We will commence this session with a presentation by Mr. Shailendra Singh Baghel, Associate Director at CareEdge Ratings. This will be followed by a panel discussion and a Q&A session. In case of queries, participants are requested to key in your panel. We will take up your queries at the end of the discussion. Now, may I invite Shailendra to make the presentation.
Shailendra, you are on mute.
Good afternoon, everyone. The topic for today's webinar is thermal power, turning up the heat. India's thermal power sector has seen a resurgence recently thanks to improved PLFs driven by strong power demand and limited new capacity. Higher availability of domestic coal, along with robust power demand, has revived the fortunes of merchant power plants. Timely payment from state distribution utilities post-implementation of the LPSC has improved the liquidity profile of IPPs. As a result, the sector has seen resolution of plants via NCLT route. In today's webinar, we would like to cover the key changes in thermal power sector in the recent past and the way forward. The content flow in today's webinar includes the following: power demand, thermal capacity performance, fuel supply, DISCOM's performance, and key takeaways. To set the context, we will take an overview of the trend in power demand. As shown in Exhibit 1, the energy demand has witnessed sharp growth during FY22 to 24 in the range of 7.5% to 9.5%, as against average demand growth of 4% from FY16 to FY20. This is primarily on account of healthy GDP growth. Energy demand in future shall be driven by rising urbanization and low per capita energy consumption as compared to global average. As shown in Exhibit 2, the peak power demand reached an all-time high of 250 gigawatt in 9 months FY25. Peak deficit declined to 1.2% in FY24 as against 1.9% in FY23. Peak demand is driven by increasing temperatures during summers and buoyant economic environment. The key drivers for future demand growth are increasing share of manufacturing, buoyant GDP growth, increasing penetration of electric vehicles, and urbanization. Government of India has taken several initiatives like Make in India and PLI scheme to boost the share of manufacturing in GDP from 15% to 25% in the medium term. Considering the energy intensive nature of manufacturing, this is expected to augur well for energy growth. India is the fastest growing large economy in the world. Historically, energy demand is strongly correlated to GDP growth, and rising industrialization and economic activity is expected to increase energy demand. Data center is witnessing so robust demand in India, which also argues well for energy demand. Electric vehicles has witnessed robust demand, especially in two-wheeler and four-wheeler segment, driven by decline in battery prices and subsidy from Government of India. The lower cost of ownership supports the growth of EV, which is expected to replace gasoline demand with electricity. Rising urbanization, along with increase in per capita electricity consumption, is expected to drive the electricity demand. Having seen the trends in power demand, we'll now dive into our topic, thermal power performance. While overall installed generation capacity has increased by 115 gigawatt in last 7 years, The thermal capacity addition has been modest at 25 gigawatt. Center and states have accounted for majority of the capacity addition, while private sector participation has been modest on account of past challenges faced by the sector. However, the share of thermal in over generation has remained high at 75%. While the share of generation from renewable has increased to 13%, the same is not commensurate with the 2.5-fold increase in installed capacity in the same period due to inherent lower PLF of renewable power projects. Share of generation from hydro sources has declined due to limited capacity addition of 3 gigawatt, hydrological factors leading to lower generation, and shutdown of one of the private hydro project. Here, we focus on the annual trend in capacity addition in thermal segment. Average capacity addition in the last 5 years has been lower at 4.5 gigawatt as against 20 plus gigawatt in FY13 to FY16. Thermal power projects have faced challenges in the past due to lack of long-term PPAs, cost overruns, lower fuel availability, and promoter-related issues. The outlook for capacity addition looks promising, with CEA envisaging 80 gigawatt thermal capacity addition by FY32 to meet power demand. As on December 24, 30 gigawatt thermal power capacity is under construction, out of which 50% is expected to be commissioned in next 2-3 years. While the center and state comprise majority of under construction thermal capacity, strong players from private sector have shown interest in acquiring plants via NCLT route. The PLF of thermal power projects owned by center, state, and private sector entities has seen an improvement in the last 5 years. All India thermal PLF has improved from 56% in FY20 to 69% in FY24. While cost plus projects have limited upside from higher generation, private sector projects with untied capacity have benefited from the tailwinds. Despite RE capacity increasing at a significant rate, its share in generation is modest, owing to intermittency, which results in lower PLFs. Consequently, thermal power projects have operated at higher PLF. Lack of PPAs had adversely impacted the credit profile of thermal power projects in the past. However, buoyant merchant tariffs in the past 3 years, with average tariff above 4.5 per unit as against 3 per unit, has mitigated the risk to some extent. Discoms were hesitant to sign long-term PPAs and resorted to buying via merchant route. Hence, the share of short-term sale has increased from 9 to 10% to 12 to 13% in the last 3 years. High merchant tariffs, along with adequate fuel under e-auction at affordable prices, has improved the contribution margin of merchant power projects. It may be noted that short-term tariffs have moderated in year-to-date FY25, and sustenance of merchant tariffs at above average levels remains to be seen. As shown in Exhibit 10, the total coal dispatch and supply to power sector has improved in recent years with higher production from CIL and its subsidiaries. This has improved the materialization under FSA and benefited projects with long-term fuel supply arrangements. Moreover, the premium of e-auction coal over CIL notified price has declined materially, thereby reducing the fuel cost for merchant power projects. This has reduced the fuel risk for domestic coal-based power plants. Performance metrics of imported coal plants have improved, driven by must-run status of these plants under Section 11 of Electricity Act. Lower price of Indonesian coal led to lower fuel cost and higher position in merit order. The rating distribution of CareEdge rated thermal generation entities has a positive bias toward rating category of A and above. The ratings are supported by strong parentage, presence of long-term PPAs leading to revenue visibility, adequate availability of coal under FSA or Shakti scheme, improved tariff realization in short-term power market, and improved payment pattern from state distribution utilities post implementation of LPSC scheme. The credit profile of thermal gencos rated by CareEdge rating has improved over the last 3 years, with the share of A and AA category improving by 12%. The factors leading to better credit profile are higher realization from merchant sales, adequate fuel from FSA, timely payment from discoms, and acquisition by strong promoters in select cases. Having taken an overview of thermal generation, we will now dive into power distribution sector, which has a direct impact on the credit profile of thermal gencos. As shown in Exhibit 14, book losses of discoms increased to 67,000 crore in FY23 as against 14,000 crore in FY22 and 78,000 crore in FY21. The jump in book losses is primarily on account of strong power demand leading to higher power procurement cost. Short-term purchase via exchange at higher rate and blending of imported coal as mandated by MOP, along with limited tariff hike, were the other factors. As shown in Exhibit 15, the gross debt of discoms have increased at a CAGR of 8% during FY19 to 23 due to debt from PFC, REC for settlement of Genco dues under LPSC, debt funding of capex, and loss funding. Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan constitute 55% of the debt on all India basis. Cash gap per unit has declined on a year-on-year basis to 39 paisa per unit, a decline of 20 paisa, primarily on account of tariff hike and limited increase in power procurement cost. Power procurement cost had spiked in FY23 owing to power purchase from exchange at higher rates and blending of imported coal as per MOP mandate. Absolute cash gap declined from 83,000 crore in FY23 to 58,000 crore in FY24. AT&C losses have declined from 22% during FY19 to 21 to 15 to 16% in the last 3 years on account of improved billing and collection efficiency. Replacement of defective meters, prevention of theft, and segregation of agri feeders have led to higher billing efficiency. Subsidy payout of more than 100% led to higher collection efficiency. As per LPSC scheme, the dues outstanding around June 22 have been converted into EMIs. The number of EMIs were dependent on the amount outstanding with maximum 48 EMIs in case dues are above 10,000 crores and 12 EMIs in case dues are below 500 crores. As on July 24, 13 states have paid 1 lakh crore as against 1.4 lakh crore of legacy dues. 10 states opted for loans from PFC REC with sanctioned loan of 1,14,000 crore. Supported by LPSC scheme, the total dues from DISCOM has declined to 66,000 crores as on February 25. Moreover, the share of overdues has declined to 41% of total dues, with remaining being within credit period as per PPA. Payment from distribution utilities for current dues has been timely, as observed in the rated portfolio of CareEdge Ratings. Now coming on to some of the reforms underway to revive power distribution segment. One of the key initiatives is RDSS with the objective of reducing AT&C losses to 12 to 15% and reducing ACS ARR gap to zero by FY25, along with the objective of improvement in quality of power supply. The scheme has an outlay of 3 lakh crore with budgetary support of close to 1 lakh crore. The outlay is divided into smart metering and loss reduction, system strengthening, and modernization work. Another improvement is LPSC scheme, which allowed provision for one-time liquidation of arrears, enabling DISCOM to pay outstanding dues in up to 48 monthly installment. Regulation of power in case of non-maintenance of payment security mechanism or continuation of default in payment of outstanding dues acted as a deterrent for timely payment from DISCOM. Subsidy accounting norms have been amended in June 23 with quarterly report within 30 days of end of quarter. This report covers the subsidy booking and payment as per defined rules. Timely issuance of tariff order and adequacy of tariff hikes is critical for sustained improvement in financial health of DISCOMs. Lastly, privatization of DISCOMs has also been attempted, starting with union territories. Although past attempts of privatization were delayed due to protests from customers and unions. Now we would like to move towards key takeaways from the webinar. Key driving factors for thermal power sectors are as follows. Thermal generation is expected to meet base load requirement in the medium term till renewable plus storage attains price parity and scale. Moreover, as per CEA, 80 gigawatt thermal capacity is required till FY32 to meet the rising power demand. The financial profile of key private sector players has improved in the recent past with resolution of legacy issues, improved coal availability, higher merchant rates, and deleveraging. Improved coal allocation under various schemes by MOP, including higher realization in FSA, Shakti, and e-auction, has reduced the fuel risk. The resolution of stress asset via NCLT route has also renewed interest in the sector, with active participation from strong players. Collection cycle from state distribution utilities has improved post LPSC scheme, leading to improved liquidity profile of GENCOs. Now we would look at key constraining factors for thermal power sector. Absence of long-term PPAs from DISCOMs has impacted the sector since long-term PPAs provide revenue visibility and aid in financing of projects with long tenor debt. Merchant tariffs have declined in year-to-date FY25 after remaining high the last 3 years. Thermal power projects with untied capacity may face headwinds in case the tariff decline further. Thermal power projects have high implementation period of 4 to 5 years and are exposed to execution risk. Initiatives are required for improving availability of land, coal linkage for greenfield, brownfield projects, and faster approvals. The sector is exposed to regulatory risks since any change in law needs to be approved by respective CRC or CRC. In the past, such orders have been delayed, which adversely impacted financial profile of thermal power projects. Moreover, implementation of FGD and adequate compensation for related capex remains critical. A rising share of renewables may require investment in flexible operation of thermal power projects, and adequate compensation for the same needs to be provided. Overall, the outlook for thermal power sector has improved in the recent past. Whether the same leads to greater participation from private sector in the medium term remains to be seen. Thank you. I will now hand it back to Mamta.
Thank you, Shailendra. Attendees are requested to key in their questions, which we will take up after our panel discussion. Now, may I invite Sabyasachi Majumdar to take over the session, please. Sabyasachi Majumdar is a senior director at CareEdge Ratings. He has over 25 years of experience in credit rating and sectoral research across diverse sectors such as power, renewable energy, cement, sugar, chemicals, oil and gas, etc. He is an alumnus of IIM Lucknow and Delhi College of Engineering. Over to you, Sabyasachi.
Yeah, thanks, Mamta, and thanks, Shailendra, for a very comprehensive presentation on the thermal sector, which sets the context very beautifully for our webinar today. Warm welcome to all the participants for our webinar. I would also like to thank our esteemed panelists who have taken their valuable time out for our webinar. I am sure their insights will add a lot of, value to the proceedings and will leave us all much enlightened on the sector. Without any further ado, let me introduce our esteemed panel members for the webinar in alphabetical order. Our first participant today is Mr. Abhijit Basu, Cluster CFO-Generation, Tata Power Limited. Mr. Basu is a postgraduate in commerce, a professional accountant, and an alumni of IIM Ahmedabad. He has 30 years of experience in the field of finance projects, internal audit, risk management, insurance, and commercials and bidding models, etc. He has worked with companies like Alcoa, ACC, Lever, Woodlands, and Tata Power. He has been rewarded with the best CFO with exemplary all-round performance for the turnaround of the 1980 megawatt Prayagraj Power Generation Company. Welcome, Mr. Basu. Our next participant.
Thank you, Sabyasachi.
Our next participant today is Mr. Ajay Bagri, CFO, SEIL Energy Limited. Mr. Basu has 26 years of rich experience, including 16 years at Tata Power, in various leadership positions, which included the CFO of CGPL, CFO of Power Links Transmission Limited, Head of Investor Relations at Tata Power. Prior to that, he has worked with companies like Scott's, ITI Limited, and ICA. At SEIL, he has conceptualized and led the formulation of financial strategy leading to tax-efficient financial structure, diversified sources of funding, resulting in substantial positive impact on profitability. Welcome, Mr. Ajay Bagri.
Thank you, Mr. Majumdar.
Yeah. Our next participant is Mr. Dilip Jha, CFO, Adani Power Limited. Mr. Jha has 26 years of work experience. His education qualification include BSc Chemistry, CSCS, 1 year Adani Harvard Leadership Program, and 4 year Adani Leadership and Acceleration Program. He is a leader in finance and has been instrumental in business transformation across his career. He has experience in project finance, banking, and treasury management, capital liquidity plan, investor presentation, etc. Welcome, Mr. Dilip Jha.
Thank you, Mr. Majumdar.
Last but not the least, we have Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Jha, Director Projects at the PFC. He has done his Bachelor of Science from RIT Jamshedpur. He also holds an advanced diploma in management and boiler operating engineer certificate. He has been associated with PFC since March 1997, and prior to that, he has worked with companies like Rashtriya Ispat Nigam Limited for 9 years prior to that. At PFC, he is overall in charge of projects division and responsible for business development and project finance functions, entailing appraisal and structuring, risk analysis, disbursement and credit monitoring, policy and handling of stress assets. He is also the director in charge of PFC Consulting Limited. Welcome, Mr. Cha. So on that note, let me get into the questions to the panel questions. My first question is, uh, targeted at Mr. Abhijit Basu. My question is on the outlook on power demand in the medium term. What do you see? How do you see the growth in demand in the near to medium term? With significant capacity renewables, what kind of capacity addition do you foresee in the medium term in the thermal segment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Majumdar, for having me into the panel discussion. It's a very good presentation from the CARE. Yes, expected growth in the energy demand in the next near to medium seems to be quite aggressive. If I take the country itself, the India, the one of the fastest economy growing, as per the IEA, I'm talking about International Energy Agency. We can expect for the country growth of around 5 to 6%, where we can see the global part that which is slightly less, like something around 1 to 2% year on year, low because of the simple thing of increasing energy efficiency and RE parallel growth in the sector itself. Causes of the demand increases, as it has been captured in the earlier slides from the care itself, electrification of the lot of transportation, the shift to the heat pumps for the residentials, commercial heating, the new concept as a services, industrial processes, and the domestic energy use, and the rise in the productivity. So, in a different combination, if we can capsule of this thing, the causes of the demand increases heavily. If we're talking about the RE capacity, of course, we have seen that 1.09 degrees centigrade rise for 1800 to 1900 decades. And Paris Agreement talks about to control for the 2% below of the target. So definitely RE will be coming over here. So addition to the thermal, it will be given additional capacity to the added for the medium term. If I talk about the solar in that way, there's a tremendous increase, like it could be rise of the 50% in the next 5 years globally. I'm talking about India, China, and US together. If I talk about the wind, I can see the significant growth, especially in the offshore. I can talk about that. If you talk about the Europe and in the some parts of the Asia, not on the onshore, on the offshore part of it. Energy as a storage, which you're talking about PSPs and the batteries, will balance the supplies and the demand. So summarily, there will be a huge energy will be requiring by that time. On capacity addition, if you talk about that, we can see that yes, 500 gigawatt of RE we are talking about in 2030, wind and solar together. And if you talk about the Europe offshore wind, China continue to lead in the RE. Also, the new technology, hydrogen will comes on the way, and hydro and the green hydrogen is also part of the new addition to the portfolio. Technology advancement is another way what I can see that the like floating solar panel efficiency, battery storage, and the new generation wind turbine is supporting that the growth kind of a thing. Summarily, there is a midterm capacity addition is huge, and the global RE capacity according to IA, if you talk about, expect to increase 70% between the 20 to 30 next 10 years we're talking about. And the solar part of that, the PV market could reach around 1,300 megawatts of 2025. I'm talking about around 1,000 megawatts from 2020. Clear addition of that. Wind I touched upon on the offshore on the Europe, and it says storage is a dramatic change. Like we're talking about an increase almost 25% to 30% annually in the medium term. So summarily, there is a huge capacity addition and demand. I can see and foresee that the country is going to see, considering the overall the growth prospect. Capacity addition, if you come from the IA to the NEB zone, yes, there is an installed capacity. I can clear see 2027. If you see the data, is talking about installed capacity of around 610 gigawatts, and 2032, it's simply coming touching to the 900 gigawatts. Means we are talking about almost 50% rise in the capacity addition in the NEP's parlance. So So there's a clear demand kind of a thing which you can see.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to repeat the same question to Mr. Dilip Jha. What do you see as the demand, medium-term demand growth over, let's say, the next 3 to 5 years? And what is the kind of capacity additions that you are foreseeing with a rough breakup between thermal and renewables?
Yeah, so this is wonderful, the session going on, and the Shailendra also did very good job. Most of the things Abhijit has already, the briefed. But so as we know that, the 20th electric power survey begs total demand in FY 26-27 at near about, 2000 billion unit, which is 21% higher, approx 21% higher than the financial year 24, which was approx 1600 billion. And peak demand at 296 gigawatt, which is almost 18% higher than the current peak demand of 250 gigawatt. So in overall, if you see in billion unit also, this is 21% higher, as well as, on the peak demand also, the demand is 18% higher. If you look further into the future, it estimates that peak demand will reach 309 gigawatt by 31-32. And energy demand will reach by near about 2,500 billion unit. So we believe that estimates are still on the lower side. Jasab is there. Jasab will say so many things as a team we will have to do. As the aggregate power demand growth in the last 2 years has been faster than the envisaged originally. Right. So the government may need to revise its target itself. This is my for belief. The central the electricity authority now estimates that the peak demand will reach 270 gigawatt in summer this year only, which indicates that the planning will need to take into consideration both adverse weather conditions and the baseload demand growth. It is all well known, so to all of us now that we will require at least 80 gigawatt, right? And you know what Abhijit was also saying, as a new thermal power plant to meet the by financial year 32. Even if we are able to achieve 500 gigawatt capacity of renewables, there is a huge, the gap. And the what we learned that the install capacity may be, so 950 or, the near about plus minus in the total install capacity by that point of time, so financial year 32. And it is also not be enough to meet, the peak demand. So whatever we will do in power, either renewable, the solar, thermal, hydro, this, I do believe that it will fall short. Again, the Central Electricity Authority is monitoring very closely about the 31 gigawatt capacity that is under construction or development currently. Some projects have been announced by both private and public sectors. And some of this capacity will, come online maybe in next few years, maybe next 3-4 years. We are also doing our part, and the rest of the players are doing their part. So, and what we believe that, again, I will repeat the same thing, and the panel, all the rest of the panel will also agree that put your best, still, still it will fall. The demand will be so, so much in years to come.
So good to see, very optimistic views from both Mr. Dilip Jha as well as Mr. Basu. So my question to Mr. Bagri is, what we have seen recently is that, merchant tariffs, whether we are talking of, spot or, short-term PPAs, they have been very buoyant in the recent past. And these have really enabled the thermal power projects to generate very aggressive cash flows. And they have, we see that a lot of, otherwise stressed thermal power companies have substantially deleveraged. So do you see this healthy tariff trend for merchant projects continuing in the medium term, and how do you see the overall prospects of such projects?
Thanks, Mr. Majumdar. First of all, let me also thank you, Care, for that wonderful presentation and having me here on board. Too good to connect with some of my old friends as well. Uh, I think if we, and also let me put one of the things in perspective, which will enable audience to understand the perspective. Ours is a 2640 megawatt thermal power plant, and uh, commissioned around 2016-17. So having completed about 7 years of operation. Uh, about 3 years back, we were about 50% of the capacity was open and 50% was tied up with the PPAs, with one of the large PPA coming to an end by 31st March 2024. So way back in 2021-22, when we used to deliberate upon possibility of the PPA tie-up, or how do we operate if the PPA is going to end, uh, we were in a quite the situation was quite there was a pessimism around, and with the thermal PLF utilization somewhere around 50, average around 53, 54, the situation of a PPA tying up or without a PPA, how do we run, the optimism was low. uh, a lot of things happened which had led to a turnaround story for the thermal, whereby obviously with the government clearly acknowledging that the demand pattern, which both Abhijit and Dilip has covered in detail, and also I echo the same, that demand is going to be there for energy, uh, coupled with low capacity additions for the thermal, uh, had led to a peak demand supply deficit situation. We used to anticipate it, but somehow it got deferred by about 3 years, and due to this COVID. But post the V-shaped recovery, post COVID, the market actually saw these trends in the IX. And there, everyone was caught by surprise. I remember October 22 was the month whereby the IX tariff shot up to rupees 20. Although at that time, due to war, the coal prices also touched quite high. But then the deliberation was whether this is a one-time affair or what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. From there onwards, what has happened is we have consistently seen that over the last 3 years, uh, over a financial year, there would be at least 2 to 3 peaks, whereby if you average out the merchant merchant power what you have, which is sold in these IX and short-term markets, the average tariffs and the margins what you get is good enough to meet your margins in the long-term PPAs. And there, as I said, the our worry of how do we tie up once the PPA has expired. Uh, the For the last 2 years, we are able to generate almost equivalent to what we earn in the long term by selling this much quantum of power in the merchant tariffs. Now, to address the question, where do I see a trend? If we do a bit of a modeling in terms of the demand growth for the electricity versus the supply which is going to come, uh, I see a persistent and a consistent trend in the IX prices being firm. I won't expect a price of about 20 because already the regulator has capped it to 10 rupees. But still, it would be sufficient enough to provide. And the most important thing to look in the merchant sales is it's not that consistently you will be able to sell a particular offtake at a particular margin. There would be times when you are not able to clear in the IX. There would be times when you are able to sell at a peak margins. But if you do an average for the whole of a financial year, the margins are good enough to be equivalent to what you expect in a long-term PPA. So these trends I expect to continue, and it has helped a lot with for merchant power plants like us uh, to really demonstrate to the lenders that uh, firstly, because no long-term PPAs are available to be tied up, and therefore the lenders were always having a concern as to how do you because these are the long-term projects for 30 years, 25 years life cycle, and how do you see the revenue visibility? And same with credit rating agencies as well, Mr. Majumdar, you understand quite well. And that is where we started narrating the story that there is a shift. I mean, there is an alternative which is available to us, whereby at least in the near term future, at least I can predict for about 3 to 5 years, beyond which there could be some technical interventions or technological breakthrough which might lead to change in these situations. But at least in the near term, medium term, 3 to 5 years, we see a reasonable certainty of merchant prices being firm enough, whereby the independent power producers like us would be benefited. And this has really helped us dealing with the lenders, dealing with the rating agencies, and uh, servicing our debt. So I would like to submit that, Mr.
So,
Majumdar.
it's great to see that, all the three, developers here are very gung-ho on the sector. So let's take a view of the financiers here. I mean, how do the financiers look at, do they share the same view? I mean, we know that, this sector had been under a lot of cloud, let's say until about 2, 3 years back because of various issues, no PPAs, no fuel, delayed payments, etc., etc. But lately, obviously because of various things, mainly by demand recovery, the sector has really turned around. So my question to the lender here is, Mr. Jha, to you is the lending community now again looking at the thermal power sector with a positive view? Are they now open to funding new power projects and greenfield and brownfield expansions in the sector?
First of all, let me thank you for inviting me to discuss this thermal power issues, capacity addition, because this is something which I think should get equal importance as compared to renewable. Because renewable of late has got a lot of traction, lot of importance, energy transition and other thing, but in our context, in the context of our country, which is a developing economy and which needs energy security, thermal power is not should not be left behind. It should get equal focus. And considering that the kind of economic growth which is projected, government has already thought of adding 80 gigawatt till 2031-32. And I feel that I'm also of the opinion that thermal power, coal-based power generation has to be continued till some time, at least next 10 to 12 years. This has to be done so that energy security issue, which is very, very important for a developing economy like us, should go on and we should be able to achieve that. So yes, there were issues. As coming back to your question, Mr. Majumdar, there was a question mark on the sustainability part of thermal power plant, considering the past experience which you had. But you must also remember the reasons behind that. The reasons was that discoms were not, say, the issue lied with discoms. Issue also lied with a lot of other approvals, regulatory approvals and other things which got delayed, leading to cost over another thing. But of late, you have seen that there has been some transformation in the power sector as well, with the kind of improvement which has been witnessed by distribution companies with respect to payment collection and collection efficiency. And also the positive shift in PPA. Say earlier there used to be a long-term PPA which utilities used to sign. But of late, I think there was a demand of 3-year, 5-year PPA, which our subsidiary PFCCL, being a bid process coordinator, has been able to aggregate and float tenders, and in which the participation from private sector power developers has happened. And there are a lot of government interventions which have happened in past few years, like and you say that liquidity infusion scheme, which the government has intervened to support the power sector during the COVID, during the pandemic era, wherein money has come and it has improved the liquidity of power sector, and it has actually helped, especially the coal-based power generation, to survive during those critical period. So market is aware that yes, if there is some issue which is going to emerge, and coal-based power generation, fossil fuel-based power generation, is something which is very, very critical, because as of today, somewhere around something like, in my opinion, is the peak power demand has gone to 277, and in 2026-27, that is the projection, and 366 gigawatt in 2031-32, and the installation of coal we are targeting to 277 again gigawatt, which is like adding substantial capacity. So considering that, and the kind of liquidity which power sector needed, government has also introduced LPS, which was a game-changing scenario. And we in PFC, our subsidiary PFC Cell has been mandated to implement LPS, and they have done successfully. With that, lot of improvement in the sentiments for investment in power sector has come up, and with that also we see that now private sector power players, even state sector as well, there has been a typical focus for the financial prudence and debt structuring, debt costing, and the efficiency measures and other things. All these things have taken importance, and the cost of power they are trying to optimize. So considering all this, lenders perception and appetite, this has also changed. And in PFC, I think in last maybe 1.5 year, not in private sector new sanction, but at least in state sector, we have sanctioned somewhere around more than 10 to 12 gigawatt worth of projects. We have given financial assistance, which are in the various stages of development. So yes, there has been that change in thought, considering all these developments which have happened in the power sector, and considering the demand also, considering the energy security requirement, considering the projected demand which we need to have. And we all know that renewable addition of 500 gigawatt to 2030 is not going to entirely solve our total peak requirement. So thermal power plant is a requirement, and as a lender, we feel that we should support that. The only thing is that all these addition has to happen as a brownfield. Greenfield, I think it will be a bit difficult for at least in private sector. That's what I feel. If some private sector players are having some land and other inputs available, they can go for adding some capacity in their existing farm.
Thank you, sir, for your insights as a lender. It's very important for us. So I have a couple of questions on the fuel security side, on the coal side. The first one of which I'm going to address to Mr. Bagri. Mr. Bagri, how do you see, the fuel risk for imported coal projects, and how do you think these projects can best mitigate these risks?
So, if we see the power projects which are based on the imported coal prices, which are based on the imported coal, like in our case, the coal allocation, which is we are eligible to a coal allocation of 30:70, whereby the 30% has to be the imported coal prices. So I would, like to address this in 2-3 points. The overall coal market. If we see the overall coal scenario, although of late we have started talking of that, the coal is going to be there in the future, but the overall shift towards the renewable is going to keep the uh, coal prices in check, and therefore, from a long-term perspective, uh, we don't foresee, like due to the war, there has been a initial there has been a spike in the coal prices during last 2 3 days, but now the average for the year is at a reasonable level. When I say reasonable level, means the uh, cost per unit of the electricity through the imported coal prices versus the domestic coal prices, the uh, incremental would be somewhere in the range of 30-35%, which comes to about 4.5 to 4 rupees or so, which is easily uh, can be accommodated either under the domestic PPS or under the even in the merchant tariff. So, from the variation in the as far as variation in the coal prices are concerned, I for us for the projects like us which are on the hybrid, I do not see too much of a risk because those are the manageable risk. Plus, what we do is we enter into a long-term contract with the miners. So earlier we had a contract for the 10 years, which had both fixed and the escalable component, and uh, the contracts are likely to end somewhere in uh, 28, 29, post which we will keep negotiating and renewing it for another period. So while if we see at a global level, the risk is low because of the renewable capacity addition, the overall threat to the a very exorbitant increase in the coal prices seems to be low. Uh, but if I talk of uh, plants which are uh, entirely on 100% imported coal prices, they are obviously, if unless and until it's a fuel pass-through mechanism in the PPA, you tend to get hit on the in the year in which there is a coal price volatility. As I have been the CFO of the CGPL, from that experience, I can say unless and until you have some sort of a backward integration into the coal, it's very difficult to have those kind of a exposure to the coal, because the kind of quantum, even for a 3,000, 4,000 kind of a power plant, you talk of a volume of about 10 million metric ton of a coal exposure in a year. Apart from the variation in the coal prices, the another important aspect on coal is the FX, which of late we have seen that is highly volatile, and it's very difficult to take risk with the kind of skewed margin we have in the power plant. Uh, the risk on the FX variation is also too high. So my take as a finance head for any thermal power plant which is on a imported coal would be to share these risks with the off-taker. Because what the off-taker, it's not that the off-taker is going to be too much penalized into it, because they are going to get benefit of these commodity as well as FX risk whenever till the time they are under control. But at the same time, if there is a volatility, they should be able to bear the burden. But as a generator, with the skewed margins, with returns not being too high into these kind of large infrastructure projects, it's difficult to handle these two risk. So that's my take on that.
Uh, yeah, so thank you very much for your perspective. Now, for the domestic coal side, I would like to, have Mr. Jha's views on this. The fuel supply under FSA and e-auctions have really improved in the recent past, and the government has also been aggressively auctioning coal blocks. So, how do you see the domestic coal scenario unfolding? And also, if you can share your perspective on, linkage coal versus operating coal mine from the perspective of a developer. Mr. Jha?
Yeah, sorry for interruption. Uh, I think this is interesting question, very interesting and very relevant. The is very important part, and we are talking about the coal, and most of the coals we source for thermal is domestic. Now, but there is a data, and as we know, Coal India has a plan for production of near about maybe 1100 metric ton for this year. And as compared to last, I think it was touching to 1000. So 990 million metric ton. It has already targeted a substantial increment and it will continue over the period of time. In next 6, 7 years, it will touch, so the substantial increase in the production. So and it does, mean a lot because it will provide the assurance in fuel supply and uninterrupted, in the that to uninterrupted supply. Availability of coal after e-auction and short-term FSA scheme, as well as the various other schemes also under Shakti itself is the good. We have seen auction premiums, the reduction on account of the improved supply, and over the period of last 2 years, there is significant improvement. While we participate in the auction, the premium has significantly the reduced, which helps in pricing the power supply competitively and ultimately benefiting the end consumers. At the same time, deregulation is also much needed, and it is need of the hour in various sectors to benefit from newer technologies. As so Abhijit was also highlighting the importance of the technology, and Ajay also during his briefing, that to new investment and also competent management. Efficient fuel management, efficient logistics management is one of the very important, part. It will, also decide your efficiency and overall cost, parameters. This is why the commercial mines auctions are being offered without end-use restrictions now. On the power producer side, getting commercial coal licenses means that there is an alternate source of supply in case there is any unforeseen shortfall in coal availability under FSS. Similarly, uh, untied capacities that previously depended on the short-term contracts and e-auctions can also have a long-term fuel supply assurance, which improves risk mitigation significantly in on the overall supply chain. As we know, in last few years, 10 rounds of the auctions in coal mine and lignite mines have been conducted successfully so far. The coal ministry has auctioned 100, I think 113 or 114, the coal mines, which in totality, combinedly, the production capacity will be of near about 260 million metric ton per annum. So the Indian power sector will continue to rely on FSS to a great extent, but at the same time, commercial mining will improve the availability of the coal in the market, make the sector more efficient, and give an alternate to power producer, and it will also reduce the dependence on the imported coal. So the availability of coal, the efficient way of operating it, I'm sure it will be plenty. There will be no scarcity of coal, so far my understanding is concerned.
Good to hear that, sir. And I have one last question to Mr. Jha, Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Jha on the Discom side before I start taking some audience questions. So the most important, factor in any generation sector, whether is thermal or renewable, is basically the payment security, and that is a very pertinent issue, given the well understood and long standing, issues with the Discom sector. So, my last question to you before I go to the audience is: how do you see the Discom sector shaping up with RDSS, LPS mechanism, and so many other things like linking your power sector loss to your overall fiscal deficit position? All these kind of measures. Do you finally see a ray of hope from the Discom side?
Definitely, there is no doubt, absolutely no doubt on that particular part. Because if you see, like last 2 to 3 years, there has been substantial improvement in the governance of Discom. uh, with the intervention of Government of India, Ministry of Power, something like LPS, um, and also like the focus on the additional compliance of additional prudential norm that each and every discom has to comply with, which is like related to timely receipt of subsidy from the government. Their quarterly accounts have to be made. Earlier, even the yearly account was taking couple of years more after the conclusion of the financial year, but now they have been asked to make quarterly account statement, and then that they are able to do it. Then tariff subsidy. So all these things like even the legacy dues, and also not only LPS, the RDSS like smart meters. So now that has been that scheme of RDSS for smart metering and reduction in losses have been rationalized, and it is now decided that it will be put generally to the government officials, government departments, municipal corporations, and other things, where it is found that most of the dues which are pending is on account of those government departments. So with that collection efficiency, the payment, and even the losses have also started getting reduced. ATN losses during as you have shown in your report, Shailendra, in their presentation, I think you have made a report for PFC for rating, and all these data have been shown. So billing efficiency has increased. AT&C losses actually in improvement in 40 utilities out of 63. So these are the thing. Collection efficiency has also 63, 90% has actually improved. ACSARR gap, which has shown that around 20 paisa it has decreased. Subsidy is being realized. Receivables is also getting reduced. So all these things, and then timely tariff orders have come up in last 3-4 years. It has to be cost reflective. There has been complete focus on that. So with that, there is a lot of turnaround in this thing, and with the smart meters and RDSS, LPS, all these things, we feel that in coming 4 to 5 years, power sector would definitely going to have a turnaround, and with that, things would improve. So that is what is like general perception in this thing. And when we do rating, and the CARE is doing rating in association with us, so there has been substantial improvement in some of the measure of the utilities in the rating, which shows a good financial performance by those utilities. So yes, with these schemes, LPS and RDSS, and those APN norms actually have helped utilities to come over. And then there was also one thing about the corporate governance, that both PFC, REC have, it's like their representation is there on the board of distribution companies as well, to take care of such issues. So yes, to address to your question, to answer to your questions, yes, distribution companies, the perception is changing, and it is improving.
It's good to hear that, sir. I am sure everyone in the panel and audience will be very happy to hear that. Now, there's one obvious question. I would like to address it to Mr. Basu. The question is, will the addition of nuclear capacity add as a speed breaker in thermal capacity addition? So basically, he wants to know whether it will be a supplement to thermal or it will be a serious competitor to thermal.
Great questions, but answer to that is that we are still lot of miles to go on the commissioning of the nuclear plants, because we are talking about 6 gigawatt for as on date, and we are talking about 9 gigawatt down the line 10 years. All different of the issues for the government regulations, land, and there are certain governance issues on the nuclear plant. But yes, it can be an we can thought of that thing with lot of technical measures and lot of governing policy matters, especially I will talk about from the government, because that has got a great restrictions on operational part of the nuclear plant, especially disposal part of the operations, and the sourcing of the inputs. That was a great critical question. So if you say that the nuclear plant will be substituting the thermal at the moment, my answer is may not be the correct statement, because we are talking about 110 gigawatts of the base load still depend on the coal. If you see the latest report of our sources of the energy requirements, Coal is still talking about around 50%, close to 50% of the share of the all energy requirements of there. And if you talk about the grid stability and the grid balancing, still we have to depend on a lot of things on the coal. And if I talk about this, there is two part actually that why we need to depend a little bit more on thermal for the country. That one is the sourcing part. We have an around 390 billion tons of the coal sources of the country with 50% of the proven reserves, and there's a consumption pattern which we can envisage that 6% year on year the consumption pattern will rise. Having said that, we have in storage reusable in a practical way for coming 50 to 60 years, so time is very short. Your question is quite pertinent, but my question is that we have to do a transition process. We have to have a transition strategy for a country as a whole, just to shift from thermal to fully on RE and fully on the nuclear, either through in the combination of the bundling with the different sources, and do step by step, because we can't avoid the base load of the country just like that and avoid and depend on the nucleus. So yes, we should, and but we have to wait, because ultimately we have to. I can't say that we have to believe on the thermal, because anyway your sustainability will not allow you, and your reserve may not be allowing you down the line 70 years. So we have to think for that, but transition has to be very smooth. I conclude these questions that no, you have to have a dependency on thermal as on date the situation, unless there is a tremendous technological interface in between, like an FGT, NOx, and other technological affairs that reduce the carbon, because carbon itself is a very costing, high price affair for thermal as a great threat. Yeah. Yes, over to you, Mr. Majumdar.
Yeah. Mamta, I have a couple of other questions in the audience question box. Do we have the time or?
Sure, we can maybe address a couple if
Yeah,
at
we'll take a couple of more questions. The first question is on the status of FGDs. So, anyone from the panel would like to take this question up?
Uh, May I add on the status of FGDs?
Yeah,
Basically,
sure, sir.
we are one of the plant which was impacted. However, uh, because we being the coastal power plant, there are three categories A, B, C, and our plant falls into category C, being the coastal. So for us, the FGD timeline was December 26, which has been recently deferred by another 3 years. Uh, but as far as another important perspective on the FGD is concerned, uh, actually, if you are in a greenfield project, it's very easy to have a pass-through mechanism for the FGD, because whatever is the cost you add on to the project cost at, whether it's a 62 or a bilateral negotiations, you can negotiate a cost for the FGD. But in a power plant here who has already run a, let's say, part of the life, 5 years, 10 years, then the FGD recovery cost, FGD cost recovery is a point which needs to be settled before, the power plants puts on the FGD, because A, it has to be depreciated only at the balance life. And secondly, within the PPS, there would be certain PPS whereby you have a change in law clause so that you can recover the FGD cost. But then there would be capacities which, if it is to be sold in the merchant, then the mechanism to recover the cost in the merchant tariff is another important question at hand before the regulators uh, decide on that. So the status of the FGD, as far as there are a couple of power plants who have installed FGDs, but for there has been a recent uh, deferment on the timelines, and these are few issues which are still to be settled before FGD can be implemented for most of the plants.
So there's one last question. Although there are several questions, I'll just take one more. It's a very generic question, and I think I would like to introduce a disclaimer first. The question is: can thermal compete with the low renewable energy, given that they have a very low tariff? Of course, I'd like to introduce a disclaimer that you should these are not really apples to apples comparison. Thermal is available 24 hours, whereas the 20 we see for solar is really during the solar hours. So we have to make it with the cost of storage. But still, anyone would like to share the perspective on the competitive position of thermal vis-a-vis renewable.
I have a different take on this. I think it is not for the competition, it is not for the matching. Say both can coexist together, because if you see the energy cost, a typical coal-based power plant, it will be in excess of 3 rupees unless until it is having a captive coal mine, and it is the plant is situated at the mine head itself. So if any plant which is situated outside the pit head, something like 500 to 1000 kilometers away, the energy cost would not be less than 3 rupees, or it is 3 rupees 50 paisa. Even in some cases, even it is more than that. And if you talk about solar, so there is a coexistence of both solar or wind along with coal-based power plant, wherein their peak season, or during the solar hours for a solar plant, or during the peak season of a wind farm, uh, there will be savings. There will be savings in the cost of energy. I think a coal-based power plant which is going to come up, they should also try to have some kind of tie-up with a solar or with a hybrid plant, and they can together supply the power to the procurers at a cheaper rate than what has been discovered, and maybe the savings can be shared between the two. So there is no question of competition. Rather, we can they both can coexist, and it can actually supplement each other. That is what I feel. Renewable and base load stations both can coexist and supplement each other, and to the benefit of the stakeholders, to the benefit of the developers, to the benefit of the procurers. It will work very well. And I think all power stations, new power stations which are going to come up, or even slightly older power stations, they should think about this.
Okay. Thank you. Any other views from any of the panelists on this particular question before I hand back to Mamta
Yes,
for
I
closing remarks?
have fully with Mr. Rajiv Ranjan that if you think about, because everybody is fast thinking about the bundling I uttered just a few minutes back, that in the hybrid could be the one of the transition phase which may be taking us from the thermal to ultimate our reach to the renewables. But at the moment, it's a mix of wind, solar, and thermal, a mix of hydro, which is coming to the most economical power and delivered to the end user, could be the only solution that if we can really do the hybrids, and everybody is thinking on that way, and it will beneficial for the end user as well and economy as well.
Okay. Thanks. So, a lot of very important insights from this webinar. One, that the thermal sector is here to stay. I mean, it's not going away anytime soon. Thermal and renewables are not necessarily competitors. They complement, the energy requirement of a society. And very heartening to hear from Mr. Jha his confidence about the weakest link of the sector, which is the DISCOM, is very sure that the DISCOM sector is finally on the back to sustainability, and hopefully we hope to have a dedicated session on DISCOMs also soon. On that note, I'll hand it back to Mamta for closing remarks, and I would like to thank again all the panelists for taking their valuable time out for our webinar.
Thank you, Sabyasachi, for moderating the session, and Shailendra for your presentation. Once again, thanking all our guest speakers for their insightful views. It was a privilege to host you. And lastly, thank you to all the participants for taking the time out and being a part of this CareEdge webinar. For any further queries, feedback, or suggestions, please write to us in the feedback mail. Goodbye for now. Requesting the tech team to kindly log off.
Thank you.